powered by Reviting, streaming from the Reviting Digital Studio. It's the David Daily. Exploring frontier technology, artificial intelligence, quantum innovation, and the intersection of faith, funding, and the future. Here's your host, David Goki.
Welcome to another episode of the David Daily Show. I'm incredibly excited today to have a special guest on our segment of funding, faith, and future tech. Look, if you're learning or liking or logging in for the very first time on LinkedIn or on any major platform, I would really love for you to go ahead and like and subscribe, comment. Would love to see you guys on the show someday as well. So today we're going to have a very special guest, Shaker Rawan. We're going to have a very special topic. So Shaker, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you on live today.
Thanks for having me, David. Really nice to meet you.
Yes, it's nice to meet you as well. And we've got some awesome new graphics today. I'm excited for this. So why don't you just introduce yourself briefly?
My name is Shaker. I'm the founder and CEO of Waddle. Waddle is a home monitoring program and platform. We're the world's smartest changing pad. And so with every diaper change, we collect information that helps parents to understand how their baby is growing, but we also stream that data to health systems so that they can monitor those babies remotely.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. I don't know if you knew this, but my mom actually was a nurse while she was still here on this earth. And so she was very embedded into healthcare. Growing up, we never went to the doctors really, mostly because, nurses don't take their kids to doctors. And when we would go, it would be like, an ice pack and a Band-Aid, and maybe some pain medication if we were good. But yeah, it's nice to have this topic, especially in a world where healthcare is moving quickly. There's so many different things we can talk about, but we're going to get right into our funding topic, which is the first topic.
Time to talk about funding.
All right, funding and infant care. What a combination of topics. I'm really curious to hear, what does funding for infant care mean to you?
I think that it is probably the most important area of investment that we need to make in terms of helping children and families in those sort of early days, because that lays the foundation for what is to come. The more we invest in maternal care, the more we invest in infant care, the better outcomes we will have, the better health trajectories the kids will have and the families. Unfortunately, that is not the case. A lot of times it's very difficult to invest in sort of these early technologies. There's a lot of established protocol that is around infant care and keeping them in the neonatal intensive care, or discharging them with sort of like intermittent hospital visits or doctor visits. And so I think for us, funding in early stages of infant care is a fundamental imperative for our societies in order to raise healthy kids in the future.
Yeah, I love that. This idea that we need to have more investments, not just in time and energy, but in real dollars inside this very special window of, that maybe that third trimester and that first 6 months of raising a baby. So tell us a little bit more about why you were so interested in this kind of with your career background.
So it was really out of necessity, David. And so in our case, we have two kids, and our second kid was my wife was pregnant with our second child. And we thought, hey, look, the training wheels are off. We've done it once before. Everything is totally fine. He was a normal pregnancy, normal weight at birth, normal delivery. And then he got sick. Once we brought him home, and that's where we realized kind of the infrastructure, the healthcare infrastructure is limited, and access to healthcare means you have to physically put a sick child in a car and drive them out to a clinic or a hospital for them to be monitored. And that was the genesis behind the company, and the product that we ultimately built was this idea that what if you could collect clinical grade information, because not all data collected at home is reliable to make clinical decisions. But what if we could actually build the right sensors, collect that data, and then provide that data to the hospitals and to the doctors so that they can monitor the child, but also do it in a way that allows us to learn from that data. What is the information telling us that we cannot visually see? And so fast forward, last year we launched the company to the consumer market in the United States, and it's been sort of like we've had rave reviews from parents and families. We worked with the hospital systems here in California to build the first clinical portal so we can stream the data up to the health system. And on top of it, we built our first disease detection models on the data to allow us to basically predict when a child is getting sick before they show symptoms. And so that piece is still like 2-3 years for us to go through the whole FDA process. But now you have like this idea of like, wait a minute, you could just take some, similar to your other wearables, like your Apple Watch or Fitbit that's collecting data. You can take that information and give meaningful insight to your doctors. And then you could actually build AI on top of that that can actually predict potential risks for you. And so, coming in from like a child who was sick and kind of going through this transformational journey over the last 2.5 years has been just incredible, a privilege to be able to do this and, impact so many of the lives. I mean, we have thousands of families now using it. The hospitals and clinics are using it. So it's an incredible opportunity.
Yeah, I absolutely love this idea where we had this integrated technology. I remember, so I have an older brother who's 12 years older, and I have a younger sister who's 4 years younger. And there's just so many anecdotal references, right? Like my brother would say he has changed 1,000 of my diapers.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that. And then with my sister, I always remember, obviously, like growing up, you kind of take on that brotherly role. And now you're recording all of the things, right? Like, okay, we had a little journal, right? And we would put the journal in. We would put all the little data handwritten into this piece of paper. And it was like, okay, what's the date? What's the time? What was the activity event? Whether it was, a meal, or if it was like maybe like a bathroom break or scenario, or maybe there was like a doctor appointment, whatever that was, it was all handwritten down on pieces of paper. And what I'm hearing you say that you've done with this device in your company is that you really systematized this and integrated this with the hospital. And so
That's correct.
on that funding topic, how did you get started as, an ex-Googler, right? You're previously Google, your product management. I've looked at your long resume. We actually have a lot of product things I'm excited to talk about when we get to technology. But from the very beginning, did you originally start with funding? Were you bootstrapped? Did you take on angels or family members or investors? What was your funding journey for Waddle in the healthcare space when you first got started just under 3 years ago?
It's a great question. I mean, it's always like easier to look back and realize like the sort of the what you had to go through to kind of get a project like this off the ground. It's hardware, it's manufacturing. It is, infant space, so you have to get all sorts of like certifications and approvals. And so from a funding perspective, we went to sort of angels. That was our sort of first round where we were able to collect, get some early checks from angel investors to really just move on the proof of concept and move on the build the first kind of prototype and look at sort of the market data. From there, we moved up to kind of early stage investors that were either like syndicate or like VCs. So Healthex was one of our earlier checks from in our product, because they kind of saw the vision of like, how do you bridge the gap between hospital and home and use data to kind of really provide a different level of care and access and affordability. And then so we kind of, gradually went from angels to, syndicates, and kind of up to early stage, institutional investors. And throughout the whole process, I mean, it is, it's always going to be a journey of 1,000 steps. You're going to have to, really prove to people that this, why this matters. Because, at times you don't have a working product, you don't have a paying customer, and you are trying to tell people about the problem, and that you and your team are the people that can solve that problem meaningfully and land it in the market. And so we came with a really skilled team of experienced professionals from hardware, software, artificial intelligence, clinical background. Dr. Anand Rajani, who's our chief medical officer, he's been he's a neonatologist. So kind of building really and asking tough questions about what exactly are the structural problems that prevent families from getting the level of care that they need and deserve. And so slowly kind of you're peeling that back, the problem one step at a time. And along the journey, you want to be transparent. You want to be able to show people what's working, what's not working, how what problems you're encountering, and soliciting their help, especially people who are invested in you financially, or even just like, my family, my wife, and my kids who are like watching this journey unfold, being able to kind of ask, it's like, hey, I'm struggling with this. I don't know how to solve this, and kind of getting information. There's a lot of advisors who've helped us along the way, gave us advice, helped open doors, helped us solve problems. So this has just been, from a funding perspective, we had a very transparent and open journey of like, hey, what problem do we want to solve? These are the people to solve it. Here's the impact of that problem. And let's just take it one step at a time. And that has worked out really well for us.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And when we have guests on this show, we see different experiences all across the board in terms of funding, right? Typically, it's getting an angel round, and that's friends and family, and maybe even some wealthy people that you know personally. And typically, the biggest challenge is finding people that are values aligned with your own experiences and your own goals and your own mission statement. So, how did you, in that early funding round, find people who are values aligned with your mission and with what you wanted to do with your use of funds?
I think part of the benefit of living in Northern California around San Francisco is that there's a like really healthy ecosystem of folks that are exposed to venture or exposed to companies. They have either invested or built companies themselves. Some of our earliest checks came from other CEOs that were had built companies and had are running businesses, so they kind of see that journey. They've gone through that journey, and I feel like there's a little bit of like this always optimistic outlook about what the future could be, because I think as an entrepreneur you have to have a healthy dose of that optimism. So I think there's that aspect of, just by virtue of just being where we are and the environment we're in, that's been super helpful. The other side of the other thing that has been really helpful is that because of our, I've been doing this for a long, building product for a long time. You have a lot, good network of people, and your immediate network might not be the right investors, but we start off with trying to ask people to help us like understand the space, the problem statement, the value, the values that you're talking about in the mission statement. You have an idealistic view of, hey, here's my mission, here's kind of what I want to do. For us, we're lucky that that mission hasn't changed since the beginning. We just want to give parents, peace of mind. It seems kind of like very straightforward and simple, but it's a very complicated thing to solve for. But we've stayed true to that. And when we meet with people who are themselves parents or have, experienced parenthood, you realize it's the toughest job there is. Anything you can do to make that job easier, a little bit simpler, a little bit, supported in the world that we live in, that's much more fragmented, that's much more distributed. We are no longer in those sort of little villages where we are able to kind of depend on the whole village to help us raise our families. We need this support, layer of support. And so the combination of just being around San Francisco, where people really understand, and there's an ecosystem, plus a healthy network of people that we could tap into, not for funding necessarily, but for advice and for connections. And then being humble enough to really look at it and say, hey, we want to do something meaningful. How do I do it? Because I won't have all of the answers out of the gate. It's very easy to fall into a situation where you think as a founder you have to have all of the answers, but that's not the ideal path always, because you have some of the expertise, you have some of the answers, but what you want to do is learn, and through that learning is how you succeed.
Yeah, I like that. Learning is how you succeed, and surrounding yourself with people who have similar values as yourself. For example, I heard you say other CEOs, right? Other friends and family, people who have kids, even maybe they relate to the problem, they have problem alignment. And that's awesome. I like to hear that. So in terms of how you structured your funding round and made that career transition, so maybe we can just park briefly on the career transition piece, because on our show we have a lot of guests and audience members that maybe they're in their current career now, and they're taking that East Coast lunch break. I'm in the East Coast, primarily based in the New York area, but in the West Coast, it's in the morning on a Thursday, right? So people are okay. I'm halfway through my week. I'm rushing through my job. Maybe I'm thinking about Easter weekend or weekend plans. So where did you in your career start to really think, okay, I need to leave Google. I need to get to doing this thing on my own. Even with two young kids. And how would you advise other people who are going through that transition do that in the context of raising funding and increasing your financial runway and having, security and safety financially, not only for yourself, but for obviously your wife, your family, and your future?
I think that I've been very lucky. I have, we are a two-income household, so the sort of the level of risk is a little bit different in terms of, trying to do something like this. That's the reality. I think that if you're a sole, earner in your household and you have to go take this kind of risk, it's a different calculus. It's a different set of considerations to say, hey, look, I'm the only one that's making money in my family. I'm going to go and start a new company. And sometimes that's difficult to achieve. I would say though, that there was something that made the journey in kind of the decision for me. It was very personal. I felt, I hate to say this, I was pretty disappointed and pissed off that healthcare infrastructure was as limited as it was for even I grew up in Southeast Asia and Afghanistan. I lived in India, I lived in Europe, I lived in Middle East, I grew up in Canada, and in all of these societies, you always kind of have this expectation that, okay, some countries are still developing, some countries are still, kind of progressing. And we're in outside of San Francisco, where the world's best minds are working here in Silicon Valley, right? But then to see that there's this fundamental piece missing, where you have to take a sick child, put them in a car, and take them over to a hospital, and over and over again, and it's oh my gosh, why is this thing not working? We are in the world of where we're doing self-driving cars, and we're doing robotics, and running planet scale computers, and we're doing quantum compute, and then what happens? The basic thing of hey, my kid is sick. Oh, bring them in so that I can take their vitals. that to me just kind of really irked me, and it got under my skin that like, why is this like there? Why can we not, you know, use our ingenuity to solve this basic problem for families with kids, or even just me as a, like, you know, with a healthy kid, our first kid, we had the notebook of like tracking all of this stuff. I'm like, you know, there's apps and stuff like that. And then now it's gotten a little bit better. I feel like there's a little bit more choices. But I wanted the ability to be able to kind of say, hey, can I have data that I can trust, that I can like see, is it clinical grade? And I'll come back to the clinical grade, because getting accurate information from your child and their vitals is really important, right? You know, these things are not complicated things to solve, but it requires somebody to, you know, sit down and. So I was like, so that to me, that was a problem. I'm like this could solve things. There's 140 million babies are born every year. 90 million of them never see a doctor. What if you could have this future where some basic off-the-shelf piece of, you know, hardware can collect this information, pass it to an AI. The AI can kind of answer those questions in their local dialect, and so the to me that there's this future where I can see, I'm like, hey, you could actually make people's lives a little bit better, you know, where you take that anxiety, the stress, and things like that out. I was like on Google search for like 2 hours a night when my son was sick, like searching for things, and there's nothing contextual coming back to me about his condition and what exactly does it mean for him. And so that can really, really, really upset me, that I'm like, why is this not working? How is this broken? How is this broken in the place in the center of like the, you know, arguably some of the best medical schools are here, the best minds are here, and this is still broken. And so then I'm like, well, you can either complain about it or fix it. And so I'm a product builder, and you know, so I'm like, all right, well, let's go fix it. Complaining about it isn't going to do anything.
Yeah, I love that. That's so wonderful. I have a niece, and my older brother has a 12-year-old niece, and I also have a couple of like godsons and godnephews. And so I've had the opportunity to experience some of these, call it like uncle-like role playing, right? The best part is that I get to see them when I want to, but then I also get to give them back. But more recently,
I have a brother that's 9 years younger than me, and he's like, "Oh, I'll play with the kids. I'm going home after."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. But there is this like gap, this major gap. It's kind of like there was a comment the other day where, you know, 12 hours after a cesarean section, like the mother's supposed to be at home taking care of her baby and herself. And there are very many single mothers who are doing this. My mom was actually a single mother for some time. So yeah, this is a real problem. And in the US, of course, the healthcare system is not to get too political, but it's very much based on profits. It's very much based on numbers of appointments and doctors and medicine. And I can say this because for almost 2 years, our company, Go Technology Solutions, built an AI chat service. This is before Chat GPT. This is back in 2022. We built a service that would connect the patient with their own data and virtual teledoctor care, insurance, and then also remote travel as well, because many people are traveling and want to get care in the state that they're currently in and not have to go back to their home state where their insurance is. So yeah, lots of broken problems there that we uncovered. And it's very interesting. Doctors these days, they're really incentivized in the United States to focus on profit over healing. And as a spiritual kind of a guy, a faith guy, I like to think about healing as well. And so we're going to get into this next topic here, which I'm excited about. Shaker, I'm so glad that you're here. So let's get into our faith topic next.
Focusing on faith for a moment.
Faith is such an interesting concept. I don't use the word religion on purpose because we all have a faith or a religious background. I heard you say you grew up in India and the Southeast Asia, all over the world, kind of with a global perspective. So in terms of stewardship of the most vulnerable, what does that mean to you when you say stewardship and when you say vulnerable?
Um, I want to address one thing before like we get to the faith, because I think that it's really easy to kind of look at the health system in the United States and kind of look at it and go like, hey, it's so broken. It's there's but the reality is that you're right. The incentives are misaligned in terms of why we're investing, where we're investing, who's getting paid, and what we are paying for. I think some of the biggest things that I challenge right now is that we don't do enough of preventative and we do a lot of reactive. And I think that's where, like, from a payment, insurance, and that side, it's really around that, right? You get sick, you go to the hospital, you get like blood drawn, and the lab, you pay for the lab, etc. And so that's really like, if you wait until that happens, then something is already wrong. And so we don't do enough of we don't think enough about, hey, how do we raise healthy kids, healthy families? And that's one of the reasons why what we are trying to do is very different, is that, hey, let's get ahead. Like, if you knew that your kid is going to get like a cold or like jaundice, or going to go through growth faltering like my son did, you can't like eliminate the curve of illness, but can you actually taper it a little bit so that the kid is sick for less amount of time because you saw it coming? You hydrate the child, you apply, provide more sleep and things like that. I think that's where those are opportunities for us to change the dynamic and change the care paradigm. So the
What a
doctors we
good
work
point.
with, the doctors we
Yeah, I
work
totally
with
agree
really
with you.
care
The
about
care
you.
paradigm.
Yeah. So I think, the doctors that we work with care primarily about the patient. They're constrained by the financial structure of the system because of the way things are set up. Coming to your to faith and having faith. I consider myself a person of faith. Growing up in Afghanistan, even in that sort of like, when we think of Afghanistan, we think of this sort of very strict and very authoritarian, austere kind of like, environment. And but the reality was, we had Hindu kids that lived in Afghanistan, and there was, Sikh kids that lived in Afghanistan. So at the early age, you kind of see it. It's like, oh, okay, so these kids are not Muslim. They're like different. But I was very lucky because I grew up in a family where it was like, hey, this is, like, learn to coexist, learn to accept. And then, we go to India, and then in India, we, obviously there's like a significant and different population. And as time came and we immigrated to Canada, and then you're entering a sort of predominantly Christian society. And that society, especially in Canada, was like just an incredible, welcoming society. In the, there was like definitely this sort of there's faith that was this driving some of that, in terms of welcoming people, making them feel like they're they belong. There was this I tell my friends, I'm like, we saw charity, we saw that Christian charity that like takes in like this immigrant family from Afghanistan and helps them and gives them the resources to kind of build and go to school and build sort of a new life. That kind of embeds in me, and I realized this much later in life, that why I kind of feel this way: a sense of responsibility, a sense of like need to take care of the next group of people that need a helping hand. And so when I think about faith, and I think about, and I'm lucky because like in where I sit in my life, I've got all of the sort of religious groups, whether they're Muslim or Christian, a Hindu or Jewish, we have all of that in my immediate in my close family. And so that kind of gives us a common sense of like purpose and faith, that like, hey, we're probably a lot more alike than not, because we sit around the same table, we converse, we hold hands, we love each other. But for me personally, I feel a great sense of responsibility in that, because I have been so fortunate I have been so blessed in kind of like this journey that I've had, I could live, that maybe, helping other people, and especially thinking kind of longer term about families that are struggling, or families that just need a helping hand to just make things a little bit better. And even like we have a program where we refurbish products and we donate them to families who can't afford them. Just that seems like a no-brainer, because I've seen and experienced that myself, that when I was vulnerable, people, were able to hold our hand and pull us forward, take us through kind of the experiences. There's so many people across, even just in the last 2.5 years of building this company, there's been so many people that have held my hand as a founder, as a CEO, as a father, as a husband, to kind of like help us through that journey. And it just strengthens my faith in humanity, right? I'm not just optimistic because, I want our company to succeed because we have a really important mission, but I have faith in people. I have faith in our ability to work past the noise and transform ourselves. We had this conversation earlier in this year around Medicaid cutbacks and the challenges in, again, because people are in different political spectrums. It's like, no, but we can innovate our way out of the cutbacks. We can solve these problems. We have solved much more, complex problems. Giving access to care to somebody in Nebraska, middle of Nebraska, because like 6 months of the year, they live in a rural area, they have a child that requires like regular check-ins and things like that, and having to do that like remotely, that's a huge, benefit. Like you're not putting them at risk by putting them in the middle of the highway in the wintertime, and you're not taking it like it's, child out in the cold, that kind of stuff. So I feel like that faith just kind of reinforces constantly, because I see just all of the incredible group of people that are around us all the time.
Yeah, I love that aspect. And growing up with such a diverse set of experiences, and also being Afghani immigrant to the United States, I absolutely love that for many reasons. My mother was also an immigrant as well. And so, how did that immigrant background drive you to be a good steward?
Uh, I suffer from, a sense of this responsibility. I'm a middle
Right.
child of 5. I saw, to this day, my older brother and sister,
Yeah.
like they would like always, 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 always like have my back. They're always encouraging. I remember I was 16 years old. I had invented like a snow removal system, and my dad was like, like we're still struggling. There were like new immigrants and stuff like that, and I think it was like $600 or something for the patent application. And like my dad is like scrounging around $600. He goes, "Hey, look, I think your idea is great. If you want to patent it, here, I'll give you the money. Just go patent it." And it's like in like moments like that where I feel like there's this. I have experienced this over and over again, where people have like reached out. They've built the bridges for me. They've opened doors for me, help me understand, grow, learn. And it's like, hey, that that's kind of like, fertilizer sort of to my life tree. It's like that's nutrient. That's how I grew up. I come from a position of feeling like I'm welcomed, feeling like I'm accepted. So I come from this sort of position where I'm like, hey, I see all these people that have done things, and being conscious of the fact that, hey, I've been given all this opportunity. Why don't we, do something meaningful with it? If I could just take care of myself, is that enough for me?
Right. Yeah, I absolutely love that idea of stewardship. And not everyone is as fortunate or as blessed as you were to have a father who really not only believed in you, but set a good example, raised 5 kids. I mean, there's so many things we could go into in terms of fatherhood there. And then in terms of the faith background, yeah, this idea of stewardship and giving back. One reason why I love the faith concept and the faith topic is because we are in a world of faith, right? We have faiths all over the world, whether you're on one side or the other side, or you're in the middle, or you have no faith. There is a belief system. That belief system typically comes from your parents, right? From a nurturing perspective. And then, of course, as you get older, your environment, and there's all sorts of psychological studies for that stuff, right? So to be able to then serve the most vulnerable, the person in Nebraska, or maybe even internationally, someday, or that person who can't maybe afford a brand new one, but you have refurbished hardware. I mean, these are the things that you're talking about in terms of stewardship. Now, I'm curious, what do you mean by vulnerable population, and how do you see the world of healthcare really tuning into the vulnerable population, of course in the States, and then of course globally?
Definitely. I think that one of the things that we have to think about, like vulnerability, that it's not economic always, right? And so, it wasn't economic for my family, and we were this vulnerable family with a sick child. And it wasn't economic. It wasn't about, not having access or couldn't afford it and things like that. So I think the first piece of, our common thread is that, having a child that's vulnerable isn't about economics, isn't about necessarily where they live. That may exacerbate the the hardship, but people are vulnerable everywhere, right? Children, they're the most vulnerable population because they can't speak for themselves. They can't care for themselves. They need round the clock care. And they're sort of the future of our species. So it is, and so there's that reality. We have to be able to kind of get away from thinking like, and I've had this conversation with somebody in the Senate where they're like, well, some kids are going to be able to, still afford to get to doctors. I'm like, that's not reality. That's not what's going to happen. The moment like we have health systems, which is happening right now, contract their like community centers and health centers that are out in rural areas, clinics that are in rural areas, to kind of preserve capital, to preserve their budgets. Everybody in those communities is a little bit more vulnerable, right? Because you now have everybody gets affected. The doctors who are sort of frontline pediatrics, neonatologists, obstetricians, those are going to also contract. We're seeing a significant shift in kind of in burn rates in our community of doctors. So that's going to contract as well. So everybody, this ripple effect that's happening right now is affecting everybody. So you've got a patient, a human being that is in their first, days of life. They're vulnerable. It doesn't matter where you are. Then you got, like in the United States, sort of access is being reduced because of fiscal constraints. That vulnerability is more further exacerbated for people that live in those communities. Then you've got, if you have a child that's ill, then that's much more complicated, because now what happens is that you need to monitor and adjust the level of care and support that you're providing for that child. And you cannot do a model that fits everybody anymore, right? You have to be able to figure out, it's like, hey, what does Shaker need? What are the specific symptoms he's experiencing? And how do we adjust for Shaker alone? And that's where the promise of like this ability to have the data, we built the first longitudinal data set for pediatrics now. And we are able to look at it down to an individual child and say, hey, what does that child need? And now, if you're kind of going abroad and outside of the United States, because we're starting to have our conversations with Latin America, we're having conversations with Europe and Middle East and Asia, we're seeing a very different appetite for providing care, because we are the richest country in the world. In the United States, we have the highest doctors per patient per capita. We are spending the most on healthcare than anyone else anywhere else in any other country in the world. And so you've got this these opportunities that exist, and I think we need to be thoughtful about that. We need to see how that pans out. And so I think, the one thing I would say, like, if we think about vulnerability, we should think about that every child born is vulnerable.
Yeah.
Every child, regardless of where race, religion, economic situation, they're vulnerable because they cannot care for themselves, they cannot speak for themselves, and you don't know what they're going to go through.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, Shaker. That resonates with me significantly, especially for parents who don't have access to healthcare, or they don't have access to maybe some of those basic educational pieces, especially for first-time parents. I mean, what a challenge and a surprise. But then, of course, you have your second, your third, your fourth, and then you realize, oh yeah, my kids are maybe less vulnerable with siblings, but still those early stages can be so frightening. I heard you say, yeah, sometimes you were investing maybe even 2 to 3 hours on Google and on the internet, figuring out, does my child have cancer or not? That's like the old saying from like the 90s is, if you look up your symptoms on WebMD, it all points to cancer. Well, what does cancer do? Cancer goes to insurance and bills you at $50,000 a bag of insurance. So yeah, it's pretty interesting in terms of how the healthcare industry is very much profit first in the United States and not necessarily focused on that healing aspect. And then to your point, if you have just simple longitudinal data, it's so incredibly crazy to me that we haven't developed a system where there's longitudinal data that's then hooked back into the provider or the expert. We're not saying that a parent's going to be a healthcare expert, but if they don't see kids in a healthcare context all of the time, they won't have that data. So to be able to say, yeah, I'm gonna get some very quick vitals on my child. I'm gonna get weight. I'm gonna get some of these things that I have the ability to now connect this into AI and look at trends, and then I can connect that into their charts and their medicine and their kind of their prognosis and their diagnosis, right? And then their treatment plan when there is, a terminal disease situation, or there's like something that's really significant, that's where your healthcare company, right? That's where Waddle comes in and not only supports the mother and the father, but really supports this lack of village that you mentioned, wherein maybe more Eastern cultures, I'm, half Korean, so in Korean culture, Asian culture, you're having this village concept. And even in, Africa and other Eastern countries like Asia and India, you have this gathering of people who come together and they live in the same one hut, maybe even sometimes 10, 12, 15 people living in 100 square feet of space. And so you have that village of like, hey, we're all in this together and no one's going to get out without being supported. But in the States, where in America, you have this very independent mindset, and that independent mindset in terms of healthcare, leads people to be very alone, especially in a single income home. So for people who are watching in a 2-income household, you have a benefit, but still you may not know about your neonatal care. So I really appreciate that. I'm excited about our third topic as well as we move right along. If you're just tuning in, we've had over 100 people just in the past 20, 30 minutes tune in. So thank you so much. We're going to get to our technology and our future segment.
Let's talk about quantum and the future of technology.
All right, quantum technology, artificial intelligence, automation, those are the technologies today. But tomorrow, there'll be definitely new technologies. So to keep this kind of like timeless and classic, tell us about from snapshot care to intelligence. What does that actually mean to you? And how do we build a system and an engineering culture and a technology culture that embraces this future of intelligence, continuous intelligence? I'm not sure if you're muted, but I can't quite hear you. So I was just gonna, while we're getting the microphone fixed out. So snapshot care is this idea that you go directly to a provider and
Can you
have
hear me
one
now?
snapshot. Yes, I can hear you now. You have a
Okay.
snapshot experience where you go into the doctor, you have an appointment, and then you're done. You're out of the hospital, or you're done with the provider. Whereas continuous intelligence suggests that it's not just one snapshot of the data, it's actually a daily operational flow of intelligence for your children. Is that right? Am I hearing that right? Am I thinking about this in the right way, Shaker?
Yes, definitely. I think that so there's a fundamental shift that is happening in the industry right now in terms of what we kind of hear colloquially as artificial intelligence. What really is happening under the covers and beyond kind of the acronyms is the accessibility to the knowledge, right? That's all. This is where really what this means is that we have been able to take like phenomenal amount of information, and we've been able to train an algorithm now that allows all of that information to be accessible to then either regurgitate, like, hey, how do I, Claude, or Gemini, hey, how do I do this? What does this mean? How does this work? And things like that. To, hey, can you build me X, Y, information, code, apps, and things like that, right? So there's that. Like fundamentally, what we've taken, like what the world of search was, we kind of consolidated that and created a window and said, hey, this is an easier way, a conversational way of talking to it. OpenAI didn't have like the chat interface until they kind of got to like 2.5, I think, or 3, ChatGPT 3, when they kind of said, hey, look, let's put a chat interface on it. So that's the second fundamental thing to remember, is that we've taken knowledge, we've shrunk the knowledge, and we've made that accessible. But the thing that's important is the door that you use to get to that knowledge, right? So far, one of the things that we have to be aware of is the knowledge that the algorithm is trained on is the knowledge that, is at the time consumed. Now they're doing search real time, so it can go out and search the internet and like get additional knowledge and things like that. But if you don't have the fundamental data under it, that the knowledge base cannot create completely like new and predict new data sets accurately, right? So like, for example, so this is why it's important to know that your health data, like an infant's longitudinal data set, it does not exist. If it doesn't exist, then you can't predict the disease. You have to have the data. And EHRs and electronic medical record systems and things like that have intermittent data. They have some data, but it's very intermittent. And then like once the child is like a year old, then you kind of like it's like once a year, clinic visits and things like that. So you don't have this sort of continuous data set. You also don't have contextual data across, hey, during that period of time, how the child was eating, sleeping, how they were developing, what milestones and things like that. So we collate all of that. So you have knowledge that has shrunk in a window that gives you accessibility, and now you have to understand that you need like data. Data is the fuel for all of this that's driving forward. I think, kind of like then stepping away from that and looking at sort of the bigger picture, we see healthcare and we see pretty much like everything, like access is like opening up, right? Where you MD, you did Google search. Now you could ask and interrogate a chatbot and be like, hey, like, I want to know these questions about healthcare and things like that. And you're getting that information, and you could kind of contextualize and be like, hey, for a given person that's like, this age with these kind of symptoms, what does that mean? And start to kind of get some of that information there. So there's this consumerization of healthcare that's happening. And it's like, in a way, it's democratization of healthcare, where it's starting to become more accessible. So if you are in South Africa and you want to like ask questions, you can have these sort of medical bots that can answer your questions at any given time in your own, in the language you prefer. And so with quantum and sort of the next leap in artificial intelligence, in our traditional, like, I would say, like, system of like inference systems that we currently have, the next step really is sort of what we're trying to work towards, like this AGI. But AGI is still like, the acceleration of that is happening with the current base systems. It's like we're trying to use the current systems to accelerate getting to AGI. But what we are trying to do there is to have, mimic the human thinking system. And so I think, where I see is that from a educational perspective, the question of like how accurate are the bots is that it's very accurate, right? Because it's like the latest thing. You can search for this and read it on like, let's say HHS and like United States, the health system, website, or you're talking to the bot, which essentially has scraped that data and now it's just regurgitating it to you. There's things like hallucination and things like that. And of course, like it's not always going to be accurate, but for the most part, it's giving you pretty decent data in terms of, hey, this is what information that's published about it. The next sort of generation of AI, I think, is going to become, and certainly some companies have started to build this, and this is like where we are able to do as well, is they say, hey, if you have good data, you could build really good predictive engines that tells you that this is the disease. It tells you with like a certain accuracy. Yes, there's going to be some false positives and things like that. But this is where you can say, hey, this kid is likely experiencing this problem. Now it's actually makes sense to go and, have a check-in with your health professional, or here, do these other 5 assessments to see if like that's true. And you either get it becomes more accurate or less accurate. And so we see this acceleration that's happening. With quantum compute, I think quantum compute just recently passed a threshold late last year with the Google's announcement, and that we're starting to see a significantly different world. And it's really difficult because we're still probably 10, 15 years away from that.
Yeah, 10, 15 years away from quantum. I definitely agree with that. And there's so many things you bring up, especially around the continuous data. First of all, I just want to highlight that you mentioned, that you need that base level of operational data, right? Right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you don't have the data, then I think that it's going to be incredibly difficult to build accuracy. Because, the old adage is true, garbage in, garbage out. So you need to be able to do that.
Nice. And we have a couple questions actually coming up in the chat kind of as we bring this show to an end. By the way, this has been really informative and insightful, especially for funding and faith and your perspective on future tech. So we have a question here. How reliable are bots in the context of healthcare?
I think they're very reliable because they're basically taking information that's published on the internet, and then they're consuming that into their knowledge base and then regurgitating that, right? So I think, it's like whether you read it on, some hospital website or you're like getting it from the bot, there's like that reality. Now, you should always get that verified, because like what happens is the biggest problem is the data really relevant to me, to my condition?
Right. Okay, well, that's awesome. Well, we're going to transition after this wonderful show to our anchor segment, Beyond the Bag. Beyond the Bag, Beyond the Bag, Beyond the Bag. All right, so we have a special segment here, Shaker. I'm excited. I have no idea what is in your bag. We have a special fun piece here at the end of our show. What do you travel with most in your bag? What's something that you cannot leave the home or the office without in your bag?
Funny enough, for like a tech person, for me, always have a pen. Always have a pen.
Nice.
You have to do a lot of forms. You have to like sign in places. You have to sometimes take a note, and and having a pen is helpful. Headphones, just incredible to be able to like listen to podcasts while you're on the
We got a
road.
sweet case there.
Exactly. I have gum always in my
Nice. We're going through the
backpack.
whole bag. I love it.
Yeah. And then, of course, like in my house, because I travel with my kids a lot, there's always some toy in my backpack because you never know when they need to be distracted. So I think,
wonderful. Well, in my bag for today, I actually have a number 2 pencil and a small notepad here. I have been traveling full time recently, living just out of one small backpack, a Toomey 15-liter bag. And so, yeah, it's nice to be able to pack tight and pack light is what I say. All right. Well, this has been a wonderful show, Shaker. How can people get connected with you? What's the best way for people to find you?
The best way to find me on LinkedIn. Let me know. Right now, this year, we're doing pilots with health systems. We are investing 1,000 units to help health systems run home monitoring programs. So if anyone's interested in joining, please reach out to me on LinkedIn, and we'll schedule a call to better understand how we can help.
I love that, Shaker. That's so great. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. It has been a wonderful, wonderful show today. We will see you on the next Daily David episode. And by the way, if you haven't subscribed on YouTube, please check us out on YouTube as well, David J. Goki, and you can find all of our episodes and content live on all major platforms, including Apple Podcasts and, of course, Spotify and all the things. So tune in. Comment, like, and subscribe. We'd love to see you on the next show. And if you're a healthcare executive or a mom or a dad looking for a viable product for your new infant baby, go check out Waddle. They're a great company. I checked out their products and we had a really good conversation today. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next show.
Thank you.
Did you know that you can go live with the power of pressing just one button? It really is that simple, especially when you have a production team like Reviting, production partner that can help you go live, not just on LinkedIn, but on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter/X, Twitch, Kick, and TikTok. So I just want to encourage you to go live yourself as well if you've ever wanted to get in front of the camera, especially on live stream as you get to engage with the live audience.
I was really nervous about doing lives. I've now been doing them for, I think, 7 or 8 months now. They very much have helped me increase my reach and online presence. So thank you, Reviting.
I'm Sarah Hanks. I'm with the Northwest Industrial Resource Center. I'm the president and CEO. Your team shows up very organized. The content that's being created is very professional.
You make it so easy for me to get in and then watch the post-production. I've been picking up 50 followers a day.